Before we get going, I want to read you something that comes from English history, which I think sets the scene rather well, and it focuses on King Charles II, who in 1685 suffered what is now regarded as a stroke. He was attended by 14 of the nation's most well-educated and skilled physicians. His treatment is recorded thus. The king was bled to the extent of a pint from a vein in his right arm. Next, his shoulder was cut into, and the incised area was supped to suck out an additional 8 ounces of blood. An emetic and a purgative were administered, followed by a second purgative, followed by an enema containing antimony, ammonia, sacred bitters, rock salt, mallow leaves, violets, beetroot, fennel seed and aloes. The king's scalp was shaved and a blister raised. A sneezing powder of hellebore was administered. A plaster of burgundy pitch and pigeon dung was applied to His Majesty's feet. Medicaments included melon seeds, manna, black cherry water, lime flowers, lily of the valley, lavender and dissolved pearls. As His Majesty grew worse, 40 drops of extract of human skull were administered, followed by a rallying dose of Raleigh's antidote. Finally, bezoar stone was given. And I have a little note here that says a bezoar was the crystallized tears of a deer which had been bitten by a snake. Curiously, His Majesty's strength seemed to wane after all these heroic interventions, and as the end of his life seemed imminent, his doctors tried a last-ditch attempt by forcing more Raleigh's mixture, pearl julep, and ammonia down the dying king's throat. Further treatment was rendered more difficult by the king's death. In 1797, the first president of the United States, George Washington, was bled to death by his doctors. He got sick, so they opened up a vein and they bled him. He got sicker, so they bled him again. And he got even sicker, and they bled him a third time, and he died. The men that attended George Washington and Charles II were very well-educated men. They were highly skilled and extremely smart, and they were wrong. Tonight's talk, I think, to sum up with 3 words, is entrenched scientific error. This is the idea that in certain areas of medicine and science today, we can prove that we have been heading in the wrong direction with the maximum of precision. And in fact, if you're familiar with something where you can do that, how about following the wrong course with the maximum of compassion? We're going to see how that works a little later on. Now, as a journalist and a reporter, I am both very proud of my profession and abidingly cringing of it sometimes. And I think that the press at its best can serve humanity very well. And we're going to see areas today where the press, unfortunately, has not served you very well at all. We have this saying, genies never go back into bottles. Once a gene is out of the bottle, it's the devil to put it back in again, and it generally stays out. Which is good, because that's how truth works, and that's what we're going to look at tonight. Now, cancer, of course, is a subject that has affected every single family I've ever come across. To really get going, I want to paint a picture of where we are with cancer today. Because out of the press comes all kind of trumpeting noises on occasions from the chemical industries and the medical industry about how we're winning this war against cancer that was declared by politicians in 1971. Now, have you noticed every time a politician declares war on something, you always end up with more of it? So this is a political expediency, and we're going to see that certain world-renowned experts in cancer, such as Dr. Samuel Epstein, Dr. Ralph Moss, and many others, have indicted the medical industry and the cancer charities for losing the winnable war against cancer. Now, that's a serious charge to bring against them, and I watched Dr. Epstein do it in Imperial College London, where he indicted the cancer charities for losing the winnable war against cancer, and he invited them to turn up and give an account for themselves. Guess how many of them showed up? None of them. I know, because I had their pizza. My organization is Credence Publications, which is a research and a publishing company. And what we do is we expose agendas that are harmful to the public. We also seek out quackery in medicine, whether it's on the alternative side or the orthodox side, which has made it rather hard to pigeonhole, because generally today you're lumped in either as one or the other. We're not looking to pick a fight. We're not looking to be cussed, obstructive, or nasty. What we're looking to do is bring the truth out that is being deliberately suppressed and allow the public to make up their own mind. For the last 15 years, we have done the investigation on AIDS, and for the last 12 years, we've done it on cancer. The 2 reports directly to the public are summarized in the book World Without AIDS and Cancer, Why We're Still Dying to Know the Truth. Now, these books also go into the medical establishment, but primarily they're going to the public. So the public, their job is really just to read the information if they want the other side of things, if they want to see how a lot of other research that has gone unreported has continued. And that will therefore enable them to make an informed decision. My job begins and ends, in fact, with what's happening here tonight. and we're going to pass this information on. It's very explosive, it's very exciting, and it's all good news. You hear a lot about cancer, the American Cancer Society. That's also, the ACS is in fact also on Dr. Epstein's hit list as being the wealthiest non-profit institution on this planet. We're going to find out that cancer is a $200 billion a year industry, and there are in fact more people making a living from cancer today than are dying from it. We're going to find out that the cancer incidence in 1900, 1 in 200 people were getting cancer. Today, between 1 in 2 and 1 in 3 are falling foul of it. And experts predict that if we don't do anything to forestall the exponential rise in incidence of this disease, in the next 30 years, by the year 2030, the cancer incidence in males will be 100%. That means, fellas, that for every one of you out there, one of you is going to get it. So clearly, if we're going to make a stand against this disease, now's a good time. Because depending on how successful we are or otherwise, will be the world, and the health world, if you like, that our children and our grandchildren will inherit from us. We can also learn that entrenched scientific error is really nothing new. It's been going on for years. In fact, over the winter of 1534 to 1535, a French mariner by the name of Jacques Cartier's ship was iced in the St. Lawrence River. And as his men languished there, they were looking to spend the winter, scurvy set in. And help came from an unexpected quarter, and the locals came up and they said, oh, we know what that is, and they went off and boiled up a concoction of maritime pine bark, brought it back, gave it to the troops, they drank it, most of them recovered. Cartier was cock-a-hoop about this and really wanted to get back to the Admiralty to tell them the good news, simply because scurvy had been a scourge of mariners for hundreds of years, as far as anybody could remember. So he gets back to the Admiralty and he says, guess what? And he tells them. And the response was, ignorant curses of witch doctor savages. By 1750, more people are dying of vitamin C deficiency than were being killed in combat. It's interesting that in 1740, George A. Anson, another admiral of ours, decided he was going to circumnavigate the globe. He marshaled 6 ships and 2,000 men, and off he sailed. In 1744, 4 years later, only 1 ship came back, and it was the Centurion. Over 1,000 of his men had died of scurvy. Now, at this point, we'd had the answer to scurvy for about 250 years. In fact, as a result of Anson's debacle going around the world, the Admiralty in England decided to act, and so they appointed John Lint and several other scientists to begin looking into what the problems were with scurvy. They didn't have far to look. Can you imagine walking into a medical establishment meeting with your pockets bulging with oranges? He came back and he said, you just got to put limes into the provisions. That's why we ended up being known as Limeys. And it has been suggested, the fact that one tiny little island, England, managed to at one point own a quarter of everything, was primarily due to our ability to overcome our scientific prejudice against vitamin therapy. Think about this just for a minute. From 1800 onwards, no British sailor died of scurvy. And yet, despite the fact that we and the Dutch had the answer to this as far back as 1800, people were still dying of scurvy in World War I in the trenches. And it wasn't until we purified vitamin C in 1930 that we finally were able to consign that disease to the footnotes of medical journals. Now, there are many diseases like that which we have misinterpreted. They thought scurvy was genetic. After all, Bill went to sea, got scurvy, and died. His son Frank went to sea, got scurvy, and died, and Bob went to sea, his son, got scurvy and died. Ooh, that means scurvy's genetic. What's genetic about scurvy? Bad diet advice, right? But it looked that way, didn't it? We'll keep dealing with these different diseases as we go through, because it's fascinating to see the good old failing human nature happening time and time again with trying to identify a disease. If you're a virologist and you've trained 4, 5, 6, 7 years in that particular science, when you're out there looking at diseases, you're going to look at it through the lens of virology. This is what happened straight after Robert Koch launched microbiology, that new science that came out in 1870, and everyone wanted to be trained up in it. So they came out with their microscopes and magnifying glasses looking for microbes. And so other diseases that cropped up at the time, like pellagra and pernicious anemia, they began to view those as being infectious diseases. There had to be a microbe there. Now, I'm a farmer's boy, and I'll tell you, if the only tool in your kit box is a hammer, pretty soon everything starts looking like a nail. And that's why we had a disease like pellagra, which struck your country for the first 4 decades of the 1900s. It was devastating areas around southeastern portion of the United States. And pellagrins got sick, and you had a 100% death diagnosis if you contracted pellagra. They thought it was infectious. They called them pellagrins. They locked them away in sanitariums, and it began spreading. And eventually, they began treating them with the cutting-edge medicines of the day, which were mercury and arsenic. So these people ended up having mental conditions and going completely out of control. So to control them, they lobotomized them. 40 years later, they found out what was causing the disease. It was a vitamin B3 deficiency, an absence of green matter in the diet. And Joseph Goldberger, who was one of the scientists out there, was going up to the medical establishment saying, I will prove to you that pellagra is not infectious. And they go, how? So he ended up doing something that was probably not a great after-dinner treat, but he went round and consumed the body fluids of Pellagra right in front of doctors. I'd go and see it for $5, wouldn't you? And they looked at him and they thought he'd lost his marbles, and they completely ignored what he was trying to show them. This, of course, would later happen with AIDS with Dr. Robert Wilner, who would go around and draw blood out of supposed AIDS patients and infect himself with them, and remained HIV negative up until he was found dead at the wheel of his automobile. So we're going to see also how infectious diseases are misinterpreted. In fact, we're going to learn that viruses do not dominate disease at all. What's the number one killer in the United States today? Anyone? Heart disease. Number two? Cancer. And how about number three? Does anyone know that one? Yeah, Western healthcare. The third leading cause of death in the United States today is Western healthcare. Well, we'll come back to that a little later on, but I'm going to give you a snapshot of where we are with cancer today. Now, I'm not trying to badmouth medicine or run doctors down. You're going to learn that the history behind and the heroes behind the story I'm about to tell you are all doctors. I speak to many, many doctors, have done over the course of the last decade and a half, as we've investigated both of these. And the one thing I'll say about the doctors I met is that I don't think I met one who did not have the best interests of his patients at heart. They do get a little desensitized on occasions because of their workloads, no question. But that's not what we're dealing with here. What we're dealing with is an overarching establishment and a bunch of vested interest corporations that are all involved in health, and they're making a lot of money out of it. In fact, we're going to put the cancer industry under the microscope, and you will be amazed. Here's good old England. Our cancer disgrace. Top specialists confess we have to tell lies to dying patients. Now, if you read the article, what it says is that cancer specialists are not telling their patients they've got cancer. Can anyone tell me why? All right, let me give you a clue. If I'm your doctor and I say, I'm sorry, you've got cancer, now what have I got to do? I've got to treat you. Now, the treatments for cancer fall broadly into three categories: chemotherapy, radiotherapy, and surgical procedures. The treatment of choice for cancers generally is chemotherapy. And chemotherapy treatments can run anywhere from $5,000 to $8,000 a shot. In the UK, it's free because the National Health Service pays for it. Our cancer disgrace. So they're lying to them, and you don't need to be Einstein to figure out that if you've got a cancer incidence in the general population of 1 in 3, which we have in our country today, and each of those treatments is costing that kind of money, then you're going to end up with what we call a hard-up National Health Service. Hard-up National Health forces cancer doctors to lie. There's the story in the Express. Now, the first question I asked myself 12 years ago when we had the team together and we started this investigation was this: has medicine got the answer to cancer? We wanted to ask that because a lot of money was being spent. As I said, even today, $200 billion conservatively is being spent on cancer infrastructure, drugs, treatments, hospitals, training, and so on. So we wanted to know, was this true? Because certainly we're seeing the cancer rates going the wrong way. It appears to be getting worse. The Daily Mail says there are 230 people a day in the UK who are dying who don't need to. And the article talks about National Health Service care, a national disgrace compared with the best in Europe. 230 people a day who need not die. These are people who are dying from preventable heart disease and cancer. Now, experts like Samuel Epstein and others talk about cancer and heart disease being preventable. How many people here didn't know that? The heart disease, the number one killer, and cancer, the number two killer, are preventable diseases. A lot of people don't know that. It's a shocker, isn't it? Raise your hand if you fear cancer. Raise your hand. Stick it up if you fear it. You're worried about health issues. You know, we do worry about things. So the fear of cancer is there. And cancer, as we know, strikes princes and paupers. Remember King Hussein? King Hussein of Jordan, this brave old warrior, got cancer. And so, all the money in the world, very wealthy man, what did his money buy him in the end? Western healthcare, didn't it? Not even 007 is immune. Pierce Brosnan, his wife Cassandra died of ovarian cancer in 1991. What's the cause of ovarian cancer, anyone? Talc. Who didn't know that? Talc, that's a shocker, isn't it? How many people here know that smoking causes cancer? How many people here would say you are what you eat? Both statements are wrong. Number one, you are what you absorb. The rest is a mess and it's leaving, and we're going to cover that later. But the second thing is smoking does not cause cancer, because if it did, when I was 14 and I had a crafty one round the back of the bike sheds, I would have got cancer, and I didn't. This lady here voluntarily underwent a double mastectomy, even though she was completely healthy, because she didn't want to get it. Of course, the newspaper report was, wow, look at this girl doing this. It's her body, of course, she can do what she wants with it. But just focus on the society's fear of this thing, of this disease, and how it will make people do things or believe things that they otherwise wouldn't. And we'll see how reason kind of goes out of the window with this disease. So I'm looking at this and I'm saying, well, you know, has medicine got the answer to cancer? We started phoning up and talking to some of the specialists who actually apply the cancer treatments. And I want to read you a couple of statements which I think are very revealing. Alan C. Nixon, president of the American Chemical Society, declares that, quote, "As a chemist trained to interpret data, it is incomprehensible to me that physicians can ignore the clear evidence that chemotherapy does much, much more harm than good." I mean, it's one thing to say, well, we can't afford the drugs, but have you noticed how that kind of masks a more unsettling question? Do the drugs work at all? Oncologist Albert Braverman told the world in 1991, quote, "No disseminated neoplasm or cancer incurable in 1975 is curable today. Many medical oncologists recommend chemotherapy for virtually any tumor with a hopefulness undiscouraged by almost invariable failure." In fact, Walter Last of The Ecologist reports, quote, "After analyzing cancer survival statistics for several decades, Dr. Hardin Jones, professor at the University of California, concluded in 1975 that, quote, patients are as well or better off untreated," end quote. Jones's disturbing assessment has never been refuted. What's more, 3 studies by other researchers have upheld this theory. 1986, McGill Cancer Center scientists sent a questionnaire to 118 doctors who treated lung cancer. More than 3/4 of these recruited patients and carried out trials of toxic drugs on them. They were asked to imagine that they themselves had cancer and were asked which of the 6 current treatments they themselves would choose. 64 out of the 79 who responded would not consent to be in a trial containing cisplatin, a common chemotherapy drug. 58 of these found all the trials unacceptable. Their reason? The ineffectiveness of chemotherapy and its unacceptable degree of toxicity. Dr. Ralph Moss, who was Assistant Director of Public Affairs at Memorial Sloan Kettering, which is one of your most famous cancer research institutes, states, quote, "In the end, there is no proof that chemotherapy in the vast majority of cases actually extends life. And this is the great lie about chemotherapy, that somehow there is a correlation between shrinking a tumor and extending the life of a patient." Now, what's come out so much with Hardin Jones's work and Ralph Moss's work and Ulrich Abel and a lot of these other biostatisticians that were studying cancer survival statistics for years, decades even, were coming out and saying that in the major epithelial, major body cancers, chemotherapy and radiotherapy, while reducing tumors on occasions, do not extend life. That's the point they're trying to make here. And in fact, in many cases, as we'll find out later, the chemotherapy treatments themselves compromise the health of the patient, and in a lot of cases will kill them. I don't see medicine winning with cancer. What I see is an establishment canoeing down that long river in Egypt called denial. And it's getting worse. Third leading cause of death in your country, iatrogenic disease. I don't know what's amazing that this state of affairs exists at all, or they actually have a word for it. Unnecessary surgery is claiming 12,000 Johns, 12,000 Janes in your country. Does it hit the papers? Not usually, no. How about this one? Medication errors in hospital. These figures I'm giving you, I didn't make up. They're the Journal of the American Medical Association, who reported, and this is only 6 weeks old, 7,000 Americans are perishing because of medication errors in hospital. That's where they gave you the wrong treatment or the drug, and it killed you. How about this one? 20,000 people are dying from miscellaneous errors in hospitals. 20,000. Do you think it had hit the newspapers? And yet 80,000 people are dying in infections in hospitals every year. We know the stories, superbugs, this whole thing. And then we have this one. 106,000 people are dying from, and this guy was up until 1 o'clock in the morning figuring out how to put this, non-error negative effects of drugs. Translated into English means they gave you the right drug and it killed you. 106,000 people. The total, 250,000. Now, those of you that have heard Dead Doctors Don't Lie and read a lot of other research on this particular subject know that Ralph Nader broke the story in the early 1990s. He put the figure at about 300,000 were being killed every year by doctors and medicine. Joel Wallach compared it to Vietnam, where we had 5,800 servicemen on average perishing every year on a field of battle with bombs and bullets. And yet here we have 50 times that number perishing every year. You know, remember that 230 a day who need not die? That's a higher rate of death than the number of British service people perishing in World War II. Amazing, isn't it? And this is the British Medical Journal. Another analysis concludes between 4% and 18% of consecutive patients experience negative effects in outpatient settings. Negative effects, of course, include death, 199,000 people a year, costing $77 billion, 17 million emergency department visits. Remember when you hear the siren coming up the road and you have to pull over? 17 million of those, not because you ran your foot over with a lawnmower. None of that. Now, this is something that had already happened to you according to Western healthcare, and it had to take you back to get you fixed. I think the lessons that we learn from this is simply this. The medical establishment is, of course, made up with human beings who are fallible. And we're going to learn also that we suffer from this thing called the religion of medicine. How many of you say, well, I've learned a little bit about alternative health, and my friend or my brother or my wife is ill, and I've been trying to get her to look at this, but she just won't look at it. Ever experienced that? And we're going to see how these pieces fit together. So, just to finish off the bad news, see, this is the classic Hollywood script where they take the hero and they plummet him down. It's the most despairing situation possible, and then drag him back out again. Noreen Warnock lives downwind of the BP refinery and chemical plant located in Lima, Ohio. I have health problems, and my 4-year-old daughter has serious respiratory problems. Maybe those problems are not connected to BP, but maybe they are. The guy across the street has cancer. The woman down the street has brain cancer. The woman around the corner has brain cancer. The woman who lives next door to my child's friend has cancer. The woman on the next block has breast cancer. The guy next door to her has cancer. And so does the woman next door to him. And those are just the houses I can see when I'm looking out of my own front door. Who's been to Houston, Texas here? Houston's a fabulous place. It's widely reported to be the cancer capital of the United States. Can't seem to get any hard data on it. It has a hospital there the size of China. What's all around Houston? Refineries. This kind of problem. Oh, well, we know, Philip, that petroleum's somehow linked to cancer. Yeah, but do you know how? Well, I know that smoking causes cancer. Yeah, but do you know how? Well, I know mobile phones cause. Yeah, but do you know how? Isn't that interesting? We know about the bad stuff. Aspartame, sodium, fluoride, and all this kind of stuff. We know it's bad for us, but do you know why? Because when you find out why these things are bad for you, all those who fear cancer won't fear it anymore. Because we have an expression in England, you fear what you don't understand. And the one thing is, most of the cancer patients I talk to, they don't know actually what is going on in their body. But once you understand what's happening, and we're going to break the fear of cancer tonight, and actually if you just follow this information of the specialists that I report, then there's no reason at all why any of you walking out of this room tonight should ever fear this disease or even get it, or your families, slap them around a bit so they listen, they won't get it either. Well, it's not an encouraging picture, is it? So the next question I had to ask was this. Okay, so we're all going down in a hail of bullets with this cancer thing. Is there anything else out there that's working? But more to the point, how many of these actually have a track record of efficacy, have a proper clinical track record of working? That was what I was interested in. Everybody had all kinds of things, and I even today get approached all the time by people saying, well, have you heard of this? And I go, yeah, I have. And yes, it does work. Now, a lot of these treatments do help reduce tumors. If, God forbid, this lady here had scurvy and the teeth began to loosen and fall out of her head, I can bring all kinds of cutting-edge medicine to put the teeth back in her head. And I can keep doing that, but am I going to stop the scurvy? No, because I haven't corrected the underlying metabolic problem, which is a deficiency of vitamin C. And we're going to see that cancer was starting to be lumped into the same bracket. In 1960, they began reclassifying cancer officially as a chronic metabolic deficiency disease. And all of a sudden, the veil went up from everybody's eyes, and a whole lot of things began to make sense. At the same time, the establishment came against this idea with the wrath of God trying to stamp it out. And there was a war going on in the 1970s and continues to this day, where the cancer industry was split down the middle, and still is, between groups now of doctors and biochemists and researchers that are looking at cancer from a completely different viewpoint, and those that have stayed in the same trench doing the same thing and getting the same dismal results, which is the classic definition of insanity, is it not? Doing the same thing and expecting different results. The treatment for cancer, chemotherapy, has remained almost unchanged in the last 30 years. Different drugs, same principle. Radiation, they've got a lot of extra things going. They've got ABMT now, where they take part of your bone marrow out, give you a potentially lethal dose of radiation and stick it back in you and then send you a bill for $100,000. That'll work. Doctors like this began to do things differently. This is Phillip Binzel. He's from Bowling Green, Kentucky. And Phillip Binzel, he was in general practice for a while, and he began seeing cancer patients were on this conveyor belt going one way, and only very few of them came back. And that concerned him. So he began looking at things from a different point of view and began treating cancer to the great ire of the establishment, to the great anger of the establishment, began treating cancer as a metabolic deficiency disease with what they call nutritional therapy. And let's look at the results he got. Helen Victor, shown here with her husband Joe, began nutritional therapy after surgery for cancer of both breasts 20 years ago. She's now 74 years old and feels great. Here's Sue Tarberton. Her breast cancer was discovered in '83. She decided against surgery and chose nutritional therapy. She's shown here enjoying a full life more than 10 years later. Pauline Wilcox had a breast removed in 1983. When she stopped her nutritional therapy, The cancer returned in 1988. Now that she's returned to the program, she is in excellent health. Ooh, now wait a minute. She came off the nutritional therapy, the cancer returned, then she went back on it again, the cancer went away. Now, if I'm treating somebody in this audience with scurvy, and I put them on the preventative, vitamin C, and the scurvy goes away, and then I go up to them and then they say, right, that's it, I'm going to take the cure away. Because a cure, you know, you hear this expression, the cure for cancer. Every time you hear somebody say the cure for cancer, slap them. There isn't a cure for cancer. There isn't a cure for scurvy. Well, let's look at this. A cure implies that if this lady's sick, I give her the cure, the disease goes away, I then give her the bill, got to do that, take the cure back, now what happens to the disease? If it's a metabolic disease like scurvy, it's going to come back, isn't it? Can you see that? Okay, there are over 160 metabolic deficiency diseases at the moment that work in that way. Beriberi, for years, was widely regarded as being infectious. It was, in fact, a thiamine B1 deficiency. Pernicious anemia, great name, terrible disease. People still suffer from it today. It can be reversed using folic acid and cyanocobalamin, which is B12, B9, B12. But can you see the principle that if you give somebody a cure, then the disease goes away, and that implies you can take the cure away because it's expensive, and you put it back in your briefcase and walk off, and the disease should stay away. But with a metabolic disease, it doesn't. That's what happened there to Pauline Wilcox. Now, these deficiency diseases we're dying from today are actually the main killers, by far. Linus Pauling made a controversial statement that all diseases could be traced back to some kind of a nutritional deficiency. But there are loads of them. We published a whole list of them the other day, 160 of them. Scary. And in 1936, the Senate document 264 stated that the minerals were not in the soil anymore. How many people knew that already? A carrot is not a carrot anymore. It may look like a carrot, taste like a carrot, cut like a carrot, and boil like a carrot, but it's not a carrot anymore because it doesn't have the mineral content in it that it used to have. And later on, they were going to warn the public that there was going to be a whole host of these deficiency diseases that were going to be striking us as a result if we didn't do something to make it economically viable for the farmers to put the minerals back in the soil. Did we do it? No. And today we are struck with a whole smorgasbord of ailments that actually weren't in the dictionary 80 years ago. Alzheimer's, ME, you guys call it chronic fatigue syndrome, MS, cancer, you know, very, very rare back then. But today, of course, it's a major, major killer. Alzheimer's is striking 1 in every 2 of people over 70, which has been linked to aluminum, cooking in aluminum utensils. Spraying it into the lymph nodes directly makes a lot of sense. We'll come back to that. You're going to see how all the pieces fit together on this. Wolseley Krogdal was diagnosed in 78 as having a carcinoma of the urinary bladder. Several tumours were removed, and he started nutritional therapy. 15 years later, at age 75, he has had no return of his cancer. I could go on for days, and I've frequently been known to. These people look just like you and me, don't they? They look like people in your street, and they lived. In 1974, a book came out that started the war. Here it is, World Without Cancer, the story of vitamin B17, written by award-winning investigative journalist G. Edward Griffin. And the book really focused on the story of Professor John Beard of Edinburgh University. And around about the turn of the 1900s, Beard, who was an embryologist, was studying pregnancy. He was one of the first discoverers of what are now known today as embryonic stem cells. He didn't know what they were, but he knew that they had some amazing properties. He called them the total life cell, because he had found out that these cells have the ability to develop into any body part, cell structure. And in fact, when he was working with them, he called them the diploid totipotent. I have no idea why that happened. He was studying what their role was in the area of pregnancy. And he found that these cells that had been arrested at the pre-embryonic state, that were literally not developing at that point, when pregnancy occurs, the hormone estrogen or estrogen stimulates those stem cells to begin rapidly multiplying into a cell mass Beard called trophoblast. And he was fascinated by this job that trophoblast has done. Trophoblast's purpose is simply this, to launch the pregnancy. In other words, when a woman becomes pregnant, the hormone estrogen stimulates the total life cells to begin rapidly producing into cell trophoblast. The idea of that is to etch away part of the uterus wall. The embryo attaches and then begins to develop. Round about the 56th day of pregnancy, the baby's pancreas comes online, emits chymotrypsin and trypsin, these 2 pancreatic enzymes, that nibble off the protein coating on the trophoblast cells, and then your CD8 killer cells go in, bang, no more trophoblast, the pregnancy carries on as normal. Isn't that interesting? But look what Beard also found out. He found out that if the baby's pancreas fails, both the mother and the child die of cancer. What they die of is the fact that this trophoblast doesn't stop multiplying and goes on to form a tumor. You see, these cells are very potent. They can develop into the cell structure of any body part. It's interesting that when we look at a cancer today, what we see, or what modern oncology sees, the tumor as the cancer. Okay? The tumor is not the cancer, as we're going to find out. It's the symptom of it. And these stem cells today are what the scientists are looking at in terms of trying to control aging. Beard also found out that shotgunned around our body also, we have the same cells. And these cells, especially for the guys, are not for pregnancy. They're for something totally different. They're for healing. And Beard found that when we hurt ourselves in any way, shape or form, a healing process starts, and it starts in exactly the same way. The hormone estrogen stimulates the stem cells to begin rapidly starting to multiply into healing trophoblast. The cell mass seals off the damaged area, makes itself into the part. That's why you're a new you every 7 years or whatever it is. Fascinating, isn't it? And it's all done with stem cells. Now you know why they go back and look at those things as being, if you like, the archetype of life. It's something that's totally different. So this healing is produced in the same way. And Beard found out that if you have low levels of pancreatic enzymes, the termination agent for that healing process, if you have low levels of it, that healing process may not stop and may go on to form a tumor. And he also showed the role that pancreatic enzymes play in terminating this healing process. Now, he wrote his work up, he handed it in. What kind of reaction do you think he got? His whole report just sank without a bubble, basically. It was a big thesis, and it sank. But Beard, towards the end of his life, he died in World War I, not fighting, but he died in that period, and he began treating terminally ill cancer patients with pancreatic enzymes and nutrition, and got some startling results. And it's amazing that those results were not properly covered at all in the press. His work was later picked up by this guy, Ernst Krebs, who was a biochemist out of Nevada. Him and his father, Ernst Krebs Sr., were studying cancer. Of course, they were doing a lot of work with enzymes and knew about Beard's work and were picking up on Beard's work with the stem cells and enzymes. Now, he was studying cancer from a radically different viewpoint that made him very unpopular. He was looking at the cultures that just didn't get it. Well, he was studying the tribes that don't get cancer, and there are a number of them today. The Azerbaijanis, of course, the Abkhazians down in the southern Russian republics, the Karakoram. The Karakoram, you've got the Hunzas. Everyone's heard of them. Over in eastern Pakistan, there they are with their apricots, for which they're famous. The Hunzas do not get degenerative diseases, and neither do these other tribes. They don't suffer from cancer, heart disease, diabetes, osteoporosis. They have alkalized body systems. Over in South America, you have the Vilcabamban Ecuadorian valley dwellers who put their immense longevity down to bad-tasting tobacco, according to a recent advert, and a diet rich in hamsters and guinea pigs. Well, we're going to see it's neither the guinea pigs nor the tobacco that's doing it, okay? But that's what they said, so each to his own, I say. Of course, over in the United States, you guys have got some people here, and they don't get cancer. You've got 17,000 Hopers around Phoenix, and you've got the Seventh-day Adventists who have a 50% lower statistical rate of cancer than the surrounding population. Now, that's very significant because you've got those guys mixed in with the general population. And they have a 50% lower rate of cancer than the surrounding population. You have to be able to answer these questions, and that's why Krebs was fascinated by this. Now, of course, we knew the Hunzas, they farm apricots, and the seeds of the common fruit have for long been used. In fact, they were using, back in the Egyptian times, Prunus amygdalus, or the apricot kernel, to regress tumors. That's a matter of historical record. It surfaced in 1823 where they invented or found amygdalin, which was the form of apricot oil which is pressed out of the kernels that they use. Even today they use it for cooking and things like that. The Hunza women, of course, cook with apricot kernel oil. They eat their apricots, they break the pits open, put the seeds into the pulp and eat the whole thing. And they would no more think of tossing the pit away the way we do over here than a Kent farmer would think of getting up out of bed in the morning and not putting his rubber boots on. And Krebs began studying what the active ingredient may be inside the seeds. This is what he came up with. There is a substance called hydrocyanic acid that is contained in a number of common fruits in the nitriliside food group. Hydrocyanic acid contains the cyanide radical. And Krebs found, according to his studies, that when you put hydrocyanic acid into the body in the form of the seeds of the common fruit, excluding citrus and a number of other foods we'll look at, strange things happen when this molecule comes into contact with any rogue trophoblast or cancer cells. Remember, the trophoblast is working away and multiplying. It even gets caught up in the bloodstream, goes to another part of the body and carries on multiplying there. This is metastasis, as they call it. And Krebs got excited because he found that when you put large amounts of hydrocyanic acid into the body, it circulates through the system, and when it comes into contact with cancer trophoblast, it identifies it as a cancer cell because a cancer cell has something in it a healthy cell does not have. It has an enzyme in the protein coating called beta-glucosidase. An enzyme, by the way, is a protein that cuts apart another protein. Beta-glucosidase breaks this molecule and actually in that reaction manufactures hydrogen cyanide and benzaldehyde at the cell site. Now both of those are poisons, and everyone concentrates on the cyanide because of the gas chamber and cyanide. But benzaldehyde is the main principle. That's the principle. It's an analgesic, it's a poison, and it combines with the hydrogen cyanide to kill the cell. Now this was immensely exciting to Krebs. Krebs wanted to know if there was any toxicity limit to this. What happens if you cram a whole bunch of this into a human? We weren't allowed to do it back then, so they did it with sheep. And they crammed all kinds of hydrocyanic acid into sheep to see what would kill it. And after a ridiculous amount, the sheep just laid down, went to sleep for 2 hours, then woke up and trotted off. And he found that a normal healthy cell has in its coating the enzyme rhodonase. Rhodonase is not available in cancer sites, but it's available everywhere else. Beta-glucosidase is not available anywhere else, it's only available in cancer cells. You have like a double lock system there. And rhodonase breaks down excess hydrocyanic acid into sodium thiocyanate and benzoic acid, which are two substances that nourish healthy tissue. The thiocyanate goes into the liver and forms the metabolic pool for the production of vitamin B12, which also has the cyanide radical. And then you just pee it out and everything's fine. Now, Krebs named this molecule levomandolanitrile. After a couple of days of trying to spell that, he shortened it to Laetrile. And under advice from Dr. Dean Burke, who was the co-founder of the National Cancer Institute, he awarded it, very controversially, the vitamin status and named it vitamin B17. He had no idea of the Pandora's box he was opening up with this thing. And all hell literally broke loose. In fact, the establishment began labeling him an itinerant quack who'd fabricated his qualifications, and that Laetrile was quackery. B17 had no reason to be a B17 at all. It was cyanide, for goodness sake, it was going to kill you. The rumors started surfacing that Krebs was really trying to rip off cancer patients with this new homespun thing, and he had to be stopped. Well, a lot of doctors began looking at what Krebs was doing. Now, Krebs was working with nutrition. He was working with nutrition elements, antioxidants. He was working with minerals. Krebs knew about the minerals in the soil as well. And it made perfect sense to him to mineralize a cancer patient and give them high doses of antioxidants. Remember Linus Pauling saying, if you've got cancer, take 10 grams a day? If you take 10 grams a day of Vit C, I tell you, the world will come out of your tailpipe. And he knew that, and he said, okay, just back it on down. But he didn't see a problem with it. But Linus Pauling was putting across the main importance of antioxidants with cancer. We'll come on to what they do later. Harold Manor was professor at Loyola University in Chicago, and he's a heavyweight medical researcher. And he had a slave force called graduates. And he got to start looking through Krebs's routine to see whether it was junk, whether it was quackery, or whether it had some merit to it. And in this book, Cancer Why We're Still Dying to Know the Truth, we quote the interview when the interviewer says to Manor, how did you get involved with this? You know, controversial Laetrile. And Manor said, well, you know, Krebs's theory was that if you put hydrocyanic acid or Laetrile into the body, it circulates around till it comes into contact with a cancer cell, which it identifies as a cancer cell because of the beta-glucosidase. The beta-glucosidase is supposed to break open the Laetrile molecule, create hydrogen cyanide, benzaldehyde, two poisons. They both combine, kill the cell. Any healthy cells are not affected because rhodonase in healthy cells breaks down the excess hydrocyanic acid into sodium thiocyanate and benzoic acid, nourish the healthy tissue, flushes out of the body. And the interviewer said, and what did you find out? Manor said, that's what we found out. And I had several of my team replicate the experiments as you do in science to make sure that it's duplicatable. And we wrote it up in the journals, he said, and people got very angry. Why? Why would this be a threat to the establishment? Why would they, instead of embracing news for which the world apparently yearned, yes, big bucks, isn't it? And what Krebs was saying is that the principal ingredient to what ails you is down at Safeways. It was a patent conflict of interest. Can you see that? Oh, that's a conspiracy theory. No, it's not. It's human nature. If you're making $200 billion a year, and if you're a drug company that's got dividends to pay out to shareholders, then you want to keep that gravy train firmly on the rails. It's business. Well, Manor actually announced a 76% regression in breast cancer to the press. That took a lot of doing. You know, he came right out. He was saying cancer is nothing but a chronic metabolic deficiency disease. Chronic. If you don't do something about it, it's not going to go away. Metabolic. cancer is wedded to our utilization of food. It's a pancreatic enzyme deficiency. And they were saying, well, what causes deficiency of pancreatic enzymes? Man has said, Beard told you, a diet rich in animal proteins. If you eat a diet rich in animal proteins, the trypsin and chymotrypsin, which are the termination enzymes for healing processes, are in the bloodstream, they're around the body, and they're used as part of the breaking down of the cellular process, and they get used up. That cancer was a hydrocyanic acid deficiency in our diet. He said, we're not eating this food group anymore, and we haven't eaten it since the mid-1800s. In fact, back in the 1800s, your bread was made with millet. And then in 1860, round about then, the Industrial Revolution was getting up. We were getting smokestacks, railway engines, and things like that. Lots of toxins and chemicals were starting to get produced. They were commercially farming food, and they wanted to make more money out of bread, so they took the millet out, and they put something cheap in its place, wheat. And wheat has no B17 in it at all. So the millet went missing, and you can actually trace the rise in cancer rates from the mid-1800s, whether it's for that reason or a combination of reasons. But that's interesting. In the 1970s, the Germans were doing enzyme therapy, and they were coming up with tremendous results. So Nixon received this huge petition. The public wanted to know about Laetrile, B17, and this whole thing that Manna was doing. So Nixon at the time had problems with microphones and tape recorders. So he handed the whole thing over to Benno Schmidt, his health advisor, and Benno Schmidt appointed Dr. Kanematsu Segura at Memorial Sloan Kettering to do a 5-year series of trials to see whether Laetrile was quackery or whether it worked. And 5 years later, this gentleman, who was, in fact, probably the leading cancer researcher in America at the time, he was a 60-year veteran, Dr. Chester Stock, who was head of research at Memorial Sloan Kettering, published 4 volumes of Segura's work to honor him. And he wrote the foreword, and he said, the greatest accolade that can ever be given to Dr. Segura or to any researcher was the one given to him by Russian researchers who said, every time this gentleman publishes, we have no need to replicate his experiments because we know we'll get what he got. So this was the guy they wanted to do the trials. So off he went. 5 years later, he issued his report. It was a monumental embarrassment, because what his report said was that over a 5-year period of time, he had found vitamin B17, amygdalin, Laetrile, to be anti-tumoral, to be anti-cancerous, and anti-metastatic. In fact, one of its main properties was that it stopped cancer spreading from primary to secondary location, which was the main problem they were having. He roundly signed off on it. He was a government-appointed scientist that was appointed at the request of the government. And a number of researchers duplicated his experiments. Dr. Elizabeth Stockert and Dr. Lloyd Schoen. Dr. Harold Manna, of course, was refining his whole procedure. Dr. Ernesto Contreras, meanwhile, in Mexico, was treating cancer patients with metabolic therapy, which included detoxing the patient, giving them minerals and bolstering their nutritional profile, then putting in the vitamin B17, the pancreatic enzymes, and emulsified vitamin A, which is very aggressive. Contreras today has treated over 100,000 patients with metabolic therapy, and the vast majority of them to tremendous success. And come on and look at some of the people that he treated. Ronald Reagan was a passionate advocate of Laetrile. There he is with Maureen Salomon. Says even as federal bureaucrats were trying to bury Laetrile with a rigged report, Reagan was reasserting his view that people should be free to use the substance. The problem with vitamin B17 is it can't be patented. It's available down at 7-Eleven. Heard of Max Factor here? That's his son Donald, who got cancer, and the Factors, of course, have money, and they gave Donald the best treatment money could buy. What did their money buy him? Western healthcare. He began to receive chemo, and chemo, of course, as you know, goes after the abundant multiplying cells, and Donald got sick very quickly. Finally, the doctor said, Mr. Factor, I think you better come and pick Donald up. We've done the best we know to do. Max was not about to write off his son, so he took him out to Contreras over in Mexico, and when he got there, Donald Factor was in a coma. So Contreras opened him up, put a Hickman catheter into the liver and began shunting in antioxidants, putting in the minerals, and then trying to stabilize liver function, and then started putting in the B17, the enzymes, and the vitamin A emulsion. He was cancer-free in a matter of months. That was 12.5 years ago. There he is on the front of Health Ambassador. Max Factor's son finds hope and survives cancer. Successful therapist, Laetrile, Health TV, and all the rest of it. The Contrerases get into a lot of the spiritual aspects of dealing with a life-threatening disease, which is very important. I've seen so many people, they just kind of wilt underneath this, and I understand why. And so people either wilt or they start going for it, and they'll do anything. They go back to school, they get educated on it. Those are the people we see surviving this thing. And Contreras knows this. Psychoneuroimmunology is the science of this thing. How with your thoughts and with a positive attitude you can do it. Contreras is a Christian organization, so prayer and all the rest of it. The patient survival between the two, this chart is an interesting chart. It's a generalized chart. It's contained in Griffin's World Without Cancer and is compiled from the Contreras caseload and others that Griffin studied over a period of years. What it shows is that with primary cancer, conventional therapy is only offering a 5-year patient survival for about 20% of the patients. Now, this includes all cancers. Some cancers respond better than others, I know that. In fact, if you have lung cancer and you go on chemotherapy, a trial not so long ago stated that 90% of you will be dead in 1 year if you do chemotherapy. If you don't do chemotherapy, then potentially you can last longer. But that hasn't been proven either. Nutritional therapy, on the other hand, is returning a 5-year long-term survival to over 80% of the patients. Now, on the metastatic cancer, the deadly secondary state, this is where the cancer goes from the primary and begins migrating, either because people cut into tumors or the immune system is low. By the way, let's look at this thing. It's interesting. Chemotherapy does what to the body? It hurts the body. So what would you expect to have happen? The body beginning to create more trophoblast, right? When you use radiation on a tumor, you will break it up. Believe me, you will. There's all kinds of treatments out there that break bioresonance, breaks up tumors. You remember Reif's work, if any of you have studied that. There is lots of other ways that you can break tumors up. But this is a bit like me screwing the teeth back into your head with scurvy. You're not correcting the underlying nutritional problem, are you? The metabolic problem that these other scientists were concentrating on. You're not going to make Mercedes payments peddling apricot kernels for a living. But this is what they were finding out. Now, in the deadly secondary state, only 1 in 1,000 patients, once the cancer's begun to spread and they're using conventional treatments, will survive 5 years at that point. 1 in 1,000. In nutritional therapy, you're getting 60% back. Now, as a researcher, I'm interested in this. Why didn't those guys make it? It turns out that one of the other things they found was that most of the patients that ended up down at Contreras' clinic were only using Contreras as a last resort. They'd done all of the other stuff. They were fixed on this medical paradigm. That's what they wanted to do. And when finally the doctor said, I'm sorry, you've got to go home now. We've tried everything in the arsenal, and it's just not working. Then they got on the plane like Donald and went down to Contreras. So he had his work cut out for him. And to this day, metabolic doctors that do this therapy, the same thing is happening with them. I would say probably most of the patients that contact our office for referrals to doctors, which we give, are in their late-term stage. If you think about it, it's quite brave for somebody that doesn't know what you know to actually, first of all, go for nutritional therapy and go against their doctors. Because one lady said to me that the doctor who treated her said that if you take any vitamins or minerals, I'm going to stop treating it. And the reason he said that is because a lot of the establishments, local and national establishments, will penalize doctors and really come down hard on them if they're signing off on treatments that are not sanctioned by the establishment. Doctors in the UK still have to keep their heads down a little bit. Otherwise they end up with 5 tax audits a year. And they begin harassing these people. And this is widely known. Oh, about a year ago, a phone rang. It was quite late on in the evening. And there was a guy called Tom Mauer on the phone. Does anyone know who he is? Well, what had happened was that I'd been going around doing meetings around the world. And after every meeting in England, I was getting this tug on my jacket. And I turned around, there'd be somebody there who had a pot of a thing called Revenol. And he was going, have you ever heard of New Ways? And I went, no. They went, well, you should find out about them because they're doing what you're doing. And this became a source of immense irritation to me as I went around the country. The final straw came when I was doing a talk in Odessa in the Ukraine. And I finished talking, doing the thing through an interpreter. Tug, 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 turn around. And there was this tiny lady, and she was holding this thing up. It was Revenol. It had Cyrillic writing on it, but I knew it was Revenol. And she went, as they do, New Ways. So I phoned up the office and I said, find out who these people are. Anyway, long story short, Tom Mauer calls me up. He goes, I've read the book, and you know those 4 points that you're talking about in the book, which reflects the strategy which has been shown to be very successful that the clinics are using for both cancer prevention and cancer treatment? I went, yeah. He goes, well, we do 3 out of the 4. So I went over there for a week and got to work with his biochemists and really kind of went through the whole thing with him. Fascinating. But this is what Tom was talking about. And this is the cancer prevention strategy that you can take away with you today. And this is what they use in the clinics, and it makes total common sense. Detoxification. Now, when they first get hold of somebody who is either with cancer or even somebody who's suffering any kind of ailment, the odds are that they haven't taken the garbage out. When I'm a bachelor, I'll tell you for nothing, if you don't take the garbage out, pretty soon it starts to stink. And none of us will go 5 days without a shower. Most of us wouldn't. But a lot of us have been our whole lives without cleaning out the inside of us. And some of these manifestations you see on the outside of you, like these little liver spots and things, are happening on the inside of you as well. You just can't see it. Detoxification is something that has been practiced a long time in alternative healthcare. But in the traditional paradigm, What you normally end up with is laxatives. Detoxification is the idea that if you flush your system out, you're ridding yourself of toxins that are built up. Now, we're going to learn in a minute that when we get out of bed in the morning, we are hammering ourselves with all kinds of deadly stuff. I mean, let's look at it. You get out of bed in the morning, you brush your teeth with rat poison, sodium fluoride. Then you think, my newborn baby who I love so much, let's go have a shower. So you go and have a shower. The baby's sitting outside waiting for its turn. And you turn on the hot water, put it on your head, all the pores of your skin open up, and then you pour in a cheap engine degreasant, which has a very low molecular weight, so it just drops right through you with a glide angle of a grand piano and starts going into your system. And you do this for year after year, and if you're a hairdresser, you're doing it 12 times a day. In fact, the baby then comes into the shower with you, but you use a different type of shampoo for the baby. The baby likes bubbles, so they use not sodium lauryl sulfate, which is the one that they use for grown-ups like us, but they ethoxylate it to make it foam more, and it produces sodium lauryl sulfate, which in turn can produce 1,4-dioxane. 1,4-dioxane is the main ingredient of Agent Orange. It's what the US military with the C-123s was spraying over the Viet Cong jungle, and it stripped all the leaves off the jungle canopy. Then what you do is you dry off. You're just getting into it. You spray aluminum or whatever directly into your lymph nodes. You then take the baby, dry the baby off, and then you get the baby oil and you slap liquidum paraffinum onto the baby. That's the main ingredient of baby oil. Sitting down at your boudoir and you start putting on your makeup and you're putting on your eyeliner and you're putting on your foundation, you're putting on brake fluid and components out of antifreeze. So you don't get cold and you manage to stop up a little bit shorter than the other person. And that's before you even get out and get in the car. Astonishing, isn't it? Personal care and household products today are riven with problems. It's as simple as that. Fluoride is a biohazard. It's a waste product. It's toxic waste out of the aluminum industry, and it is being detoxed through your body, and you're paying for it. It's a great gig, that one. They normally spend millions and millions of dollars disposing of toxic waste. Fluoride has long been linked to health problems. And I have a report here from the Safe Water Society of England, which actually showed reports that 50,000 people in 68 USA cities were tested to see whether fluoride helped or decayed teeth. Fluoride increases tooth decay, calcium reduces it. We have a study of 400,000 children in India done in 1994. Same thing showed up there. Then we have 21,000 children in Japan. Fluoride increases tooth decay. And then we have 22,000 children in Tucson, Arizona. Again, fluoride increases tooth decay, calcium reduces tooth decay. And then sodium lauryl sulfate, which is contained in all your shampoos, is a skin irritant. It's been linked to all kinds of long-term health problems. And these are cheap products. They get used in all of these shampoos. So when you go out and buy the greatest shampoo on earth, it's got that in it. You'll go a long way before you find shampoos without these problems. Propylene glycol, mineral oil, formaldehyde, all of these things are used to great effect because they're cheap. And engine degreasant gives you the squeaky hair. Remember that little thing you used to go, squeak, 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 my hair's clean. Nothing wrong with the squeak. Just don't use engine degreasant to do it. These produce what we call a toxic load. And if you do them 10, 20, 30, 40 years, as you build this up, and then, of course, you might be smoking some cigarettes, and you might be out drinking, and you might be out just generally eating food with no minerals in it. And you're porking down diets rich in animal proteins, which are stripping away your pancreatic enzymes. If you're not doing that, you're having the saccharin and all that sort of thing. And you're constantly putting your body under toxic siege. And your body just wants to know one thing. Can I use it for cell structure or can't I? If you cannot use it for cell structure, it gets put where you put your 6 gun. And it will stay there until you take the garbage out, which mostly is never. And this is why when we get to 40, 50 or 60, why are we surprised when we start running into health problems? Now, we're the only creature on Earth that doesn't reach its 7-fold potential. If you take any animal in the animal kingdom, take its maturity age, multiply it by 7, you get its projected longevity. And we're not making it to 120 to 130 because we're smarter, so we die sooner. And those people over in Pakistan who don't know anything at all, apparently, are living vast lifespans. They're fathering kids at 110. I mean, what a searing indictment against us, huh? We're barely lucky to make it to 70 with ruinous healthcare plan, drugs that send us doolally, and Hillary Clinton. Tom said to me, we've got products that detoxify, products that will assist you in getting rid of the garbage. You remember your granny used to say, don't eat 5 oranges, the world will drop out of the tailpipe? This is the first stage of your body trying to enter into detox. Because the stuff that comes slewing out the other end is good. Your body goes through an elimination cycle in the morning where when you wake up in the morning, you've got bear's breath, you want to go to the loo, everything's just trying to get out of you, right? The last thing you do is give the body fruit, which will clean you out. Fruit digests in the intestinal tract, so it uses very little energy. In fact, digestion is the single most strenuous activity our bodies do. Now, what you do is, just as your body's starting to eliminate and going, oh, good, we can get rid of all of this baggage, what you do is you go and eat 4 stacks of Aunt Lily's Arkansas pancakes, stick the old syrup on it, and then have a whole bunch of cookies and everything afterwards. But by detoxing, this is what they do for cancer patients, getting the stuff out. And during the course of any cancer treatment, they're doing that constantly. Gerson, of course, made a thing out of it with the juicing and the coffee enemas. The idea was to stimulate the liver into detoxing. Those of you that have lymph node problems, you know, where they start clogging up and what have you, this is symptomatic. So now, to take away the fear of this, draw a triangle. When we name the 3 corners of this triangle, the fear will go because you'll understand what you're looking at. The first corner, B17. The second corner, pancreatic enzymes. And the third corner, toxins. Now, Beard, 100 years ago, said cancer was a healing process that wasn't stopping, and that the pancreatic enzymes were vital to allow that process to stop. In other words, not to promote malignancy. We're now in an environment where we've got all kinds of assaults coming against us. We pick up rogue oxygen molecules through pollution. These are known as free radicals, oxidation elements. And a rogue oxygen molecule is simply an unpaired oxygen molecule that's seeking a mate, a pal, and it tries to find another oxygen molecule out of your healthy tissue. When it does that, it begins to braid the cell, and the cell dies. Now, it's long been known that if you give these oxidation elements oxygen, then they will complete themselves, and you can even reduce them down to water, H2O, and you can rid the body of oxidation elements. These are what we know as antioxidants. And our bodies produce antioxidants normally. The problem is, by the time we get to 40, the perfect age, you're about half the antioxidant level that you had at the age of 18. And by the time you're 70, you're down to, they estimate, about 10 to 12%. So this is why after 40, we start to see us moving into certain health problems and so on and so forth. You can't trace them all to free radicals, but there's this basic problem with pollution elements in our society today. And antioxidants have been known to cure a lot of underlying metabolic problems that can't even be detected on the surface. We've got some very powerful antioxidants. Of course, the originals were things like vitamin C, you had selenium. There's a number of elements that have good antioxidation properties to them. Now, today we have antioxidants immeasurably more powerful than them. We have the curcuminoids, for instance. So when we stand back and look at the problems with the pollution, hurting ourselves, you know, mobile phones, we've got the sodium lauryl sulfate, we've got a lot of these other problems that come in through foods that we eat, which are nothing more than commercially processed material being palmed off as foods. A lot of these chemicals are not tested adequately. We have a whole chapter in this book that shows that the EPA in this country can only get to test 15 to 20 of them each year, because they have to test them on the endocrine system, the reproductive system. How do they hurt your respiratory system? What do they do to you over a 10-year period? You have thousands of chemicals coming onto the market, and they can't test hardly any of them, simply because they don't have the resources to do it. So who gets to write the reports on the chemicals? The manufacturers themselves. Can't tell you what a comfort that is to me. They'll produce their safety data sheets and hand them in, and they'll go, it's the greatest thing since sliced bread. And then the next thing you know, you have a thalidomide on your hands, or you have one of these other problems. And these problems, of course, especially with cheap ingredients like SLS and propylene glycol that are used by everybody, because they're very convenient to use and they're very cheap and so on. Now, if you look at the triangle that you've drawn, when we hurt our body, a healing process starts. You have 2 layers of defense, according to these researchers. You have the hydrocyanuric acid level in your food, which has anti-tumoral activity, according to the research of these men. And you also, if you eat a diet low in animal proteins, are preserving your pancreatic enzyme supply, according to them. They don't advocate vegetarianism. They're simply saying just cut down. You have diets rich in animal proteins in this country. Now, you're living on a planet that's 70% water, you're 70% water, your cells are 70% water. Makes sense to eat a diet which is 70% high water content foods, fruits and veg. And if you want to sling a bit of chicken in there, make sure there's no arsenic or anything to kill the ticks. Nobody's going to sue you for that. But you can see how cancer is a healing process that doesn't stop, according to these people, and can simply be used and treated, as we've seen in the clinics, by elements that are selectively toxic to cancer cells. Now, the FDA does not want you to know this. And, in fact, even people in their own ranks began to come out and speak. June Despain was a toxicologist who wrote the Little Cyanide Cookbook. She was outraged that the FDA was stomping on this research and not releasing it. Delicious recipes, there's 300 recipes in there on how to get B17 and back into your diet. There's a whole range of foods that are rich that we really don't eat on an ongoing basis anymore. Nobody eats the seeds of the fruit anymore. Apple seeds, apricot kernels. Apricot kernels are the choice for a lot of people because they contain the highest level of hydrocyanic acid, about 2% against the weight of the kernel. bamboo shoots, bitter almond. Who likes marzipan here? Marzipan is made with apricot kernels. And that's why they can't take the kernels away from you. They've been trying to, but if they did that, the ultimate irony of this whole bag of potatoes is they would kill the marzipan industry. Imagine that. Civilization as we'd know it would end. Pecans, millet seed, yeast. There's another one here, cassava, which actually is not on that list, but cassava, anyone know what cassava is? Tapioca, remember that? Did they used to shovel that stuff down your neck when you were a kid? We used to call it frog's eggs, look at that. Very rich in B17, comes from the cassava plant. But who eats this stuff these days? No one. But there's all kinds of things in here. Got millet. I've got millet bread. There you go. Still some of it around. Millet bread. Fava beans. You've got cashews. Krebs was saying, eat the seeds of the common fruit. He said if you eat 10 to 12 seeds a day, you're at the lower end of the Hunza range. He was talking about apricot kernels. In fact, some people have said that if you're treating cancer with B17, the treatment of choice is using pharmaceutical-grade B17 with the enzymes. You see, the NCI tested Laetrile and they found it to be useless because they weren't using it with the enzymes. And B17 has problems getting through that protein coating. It needs to have the enzymes to chew that protein coating off. There are fruits that have enzymes that do that same thing. Bromelain in pineapples. You hear cancer patients eating half a pineapple every morning, because bromelain mimics pancreatic enzymes and nibbles off that protein coating. And Krebs was saying, eat the seeds of the common fruit. Don't eat more of the seeds than you would eat of the fruit. Harold Manor, eat the seeds of the common fruit. Manuel Navarro, eat the seeds of the common fruit. Heck, even God says, eat the seeds of the common fruit. All right. Look, if you turn to your manufacturer's handbook at Genesis 1:29, here we are. And God said, see, I have given you every herb that yields seed, which is on the face of the earth, and every tree whose fruit yields seed. To you it shall be for food. Oh, well, God, you must clearly be wrong, because the FDA says if you eat this stuff, you're going to die. In fact, if you go out to eastern Pakistan, as far as you can see, there are Hunzas lying there with their heads twisted back in the rictus of cyanide death. Well, God's not phased. He's added again in Ezekiel 4:9. Listen, also take for yourself wheat, which has nothing, barley, beans, lentils, millet, and spelt, all rich in B17. Put them into a vessel and make bread of them for yourself. You know who follows biblical diet advice? Seventh-day Adventists. Now they're still brushing their teeth with rat poison and shooting the old aluminum directly into the lymph nodes and putting engine degreasing on their heads. So they've got a 50% lower statistical rate than the rest of us that don't know any better. 6 weeks ago, the FDA struck. Armed agents went in, started rousting ladies with vitamin shacks, bagging up such contraband stuff as vitamin C, aloe vera, and apricot kernels and B17. Armed agents issuing restraining orders, stopping these people selling B17 in the United States to clinics in the name of the American people. And it made the news. Here are the news bulletins. WCN, experts warn against Laetrile on the net. It says here, experts also warn that Laetrile could cause cyanide poisoning. You're going to die. And it's taking advantage of poor cancer patients, it says here. And here's CNN. Must be right. U.S. aims to stop sale of unapproved cancer. Unapproved? What about Segura? What about all of the other scientists that worked on it? No, it's unapproved today. People have got short memories. And it says here, the FDA considers Laetrile as an unapproved drug, also known as amygdalin and vitamin B17. It's cyanide. It's going to kill you. Now, while all that's going on, in the UK, we have scientists at Imperial College slapping each other on the back, wondering who's going to get the Nobel Prize because they have just developed a system that selectively targets cancer using cyanide. There's the newspaper report in the Telegraph, one of our largest broadsheets in England, just 4 weeks ago. A cyanide defense system used by the cassava plant to fight off insects is being turned into a weapon to kill cancer. How about that? In fact, the Times is here saying cyanide used to kill cancer cells. This was a monumental embarrassment to the FDA when this happened a few weeks ago. British scientists have harnessed the deadly properties of cyanide to kill cancer cells, raising the prospect of a revolutionary drug. Oh, you know how this story's going to finish, don't you? Apricot kernel oil, $300 a capsule. Research from Imperial College London, researchers from the college have developed a sophisticated targeting... No, they didn't. God did. But anyway, that uses antibodies. Look at this bit here. When the altered yeast, which is very rich in B17, see, they have to alter it. That gives it its patentable status. When the altered yeast is added to cancer cells, it binds to them and kills them by generating cyanide, but does not affect healthy cells. Should any cyanide escape the tumors into the bloodstream, it would be rapidly broken down in the liver and neutralized. Is there an echo in here? Here we have the BBC. Tapioca treatment for cancer. Frog's eggs. In fact, it says tapioca pudding, widely known as frog's eggs by many school pupils, may after all be good for you. Tapioca is derived from the cassava plants. Scientists say the plant from which it is derived may help cure cancer. If you ever hear anybody saying cure cancer, slap them. It's a metabolic deficiency disease. It has a preventative which has to be in your diet for as long as your oxygen requirement remains. And while they're busy telling us about how dangerous cyanide is for us, the FDA have recently approved arsenic as a cancer treatment. So what they're saying to you is, don't do cyanide, it's dangerous, it's poisonous. Have some of this arsenic. And arsenic, by the way, was ditched in the 1930s for obvious reasons after the Pellagra problems and other things, because they found no record of efficacy with it at all. And it's all about nutrition. You are what you absorb. Why is anyone surprised? Can you see now what has happened with cancer is we've been going after it using toxic treatments that actually aggravate the problem because they're hurting our bodies, creating more healing process. And even if they do manage to wipe out the tumor or you cut the tumor out or whatever, then you've got the sort of Damocles hanging over your head because the underlying nutritional problem remains. You've not solved it. You've brought a lot of cutting-edge medicine to bear on it, but you haven't solved that one. After Tom Mauer's phone conversation, what he said to me was this. We run parallel missions. My organization, of course, does a whole range of nutritional supplements that could benefit people who have cancer. We do mineral supplements, some of the best in the world, that are microcolloidal solutions, giving you mineral profiles that are exactly in the same form that the body takes minerals in from plants. We have powerful antioxidants. We've got Hawaiian noni. But Hawaiian noni has known anti-tumoral effects. We have the studies printed in the book here. It's a fabulous substance. The thing that impressed me about New Ways, we're not commercially affiliated with them at all. We're an independent research organization. That's what gives us our strength, by the way. We don't kowtow to any flag. I've got people exposing quackery in alternative medicine. I've got people exposing quackery on the orthodox end as well. And that's what gives us our power. The thing that impressed me most of all about New Ways International, Tom's company, is that he is actually doing something, not only to educate people in 40 countries about this, but also he's doing something about it. He's got a whole range of products that people can buy with the harmful stuff taken out. And so the great news is, we've had the answer to cancer, the scientific knowledge to defeat cancer for 50 years. The only reason it hasn't filtered into the public domain is we've all been too busy watching the ball game or cleaning the cars, and we haven't investigated things until they've hit us. Then, the moment you're diagnosed, you cross an invisible line, don't you? People look at you differently, you feel differently about it, society treats you differently, the pressure's on. How much better it is to get educated now, so you won't have to deal with the problem at all. I believe just by changing a few little things, by getting involved with organizations like New Ways that are out there doing things that are promoting the prevention ethic. Preventative medicine, of course, doesn't pay shareholders big dividends. But by getting people to look at things sensibly, for the first time and just go back to basics, this is what brings diseases like cancer to an end. And the speed with which cancer will die will be not down to government, but it will be down to you. How many people in your neighborhood last week died of scurvy? 15? 200 years ago, I'd be giving this talk on scurvy. I wouldn't be giving it on cancer. And I'd be saying, who fears scurvy? And all the hands would go up. No, you don't fear scurvy. You don't fear beriberi. You don't fear any of these things anymore, and I'll tell you what, there'll come a time when we won't fear cancer, because there are moves afoot now in the public that are just not taking it anymore. We don't like to see a constant conveyor belt of cancer patients continuing to head the same way, that take mum and dad with them and take your brothers and your daughters. People are now starting to get angry and they want to get things changed, and that comes with education. Companies like Credence Publications and New Ways, and there are others out there as well, are on the stump doing things about this. If you feel a sense of outrage in this, and many people do something about it. Get with these organizations. If you came here as a guest of somebody tonight, go back and talk to them and say, show me more. Let me find out how I can get involved with this. My organization exists to provide this information to you. We don't give medical advice. We can refer you to doctors and where they're located. Of course, we can give you additional information about treatment for cancer or prevention. That's our job to do that. We report the words of other doctors. That's the important thing. The new book that's out, Health Wars, How to Live to 100 with All Your Own Teeth in Your Head Standing on Your Own 2 Feet. It's a worthy goal, isn't it? Folks, I really believe this strongly, that if we follow the simple guidelines and just take the toxic stuff out, bring the good stuff in, it's not rocket science. I believe that we have a shot at getting the Queen's telegram. Let's go for it. That's the purpose for explaining the situation about cancer. If you apply this information and exercise preventative medicine, my lawyers say, Phillip, please use the word almost. So, if you exercise prevention in the way that these men and women report, you stand an almost 100% chance of never contracting this disease. because there are people on Earth who just don't get it, and you can be like them. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Phillip Day. I hope you found this presentation interesting and thought-provoking. So what can we do? Well, there is so much that can be done, both in the prevention and the treatment of all cancers using nutrition, that I believe we have a moral obligation to get this information out to our friends and families so they have the opportunity to make up their own minds. The easiest way to do this is to pick up copies of my book, Cancer, Why We're Still Dying to Know the Truth, and put them into the hands of the people you care about, and even some of those you don't. This book has been designed to be a fast and easy read, containing all the information in this tape, and a whole lot more besides. There are also chapters in the book that deal in detail with what cancer is, what can be done effectively to combat it in all its forms, and most importantly, the simple steps we can take in order never to have to deal with this disease from the outset. As mentioned, prevention should start with a wholesome diet containing 80% unrefined plant dietaries, fruits and vegetables, and so on. Prevention should also begin with throwing out household and personal care items which contain potentially harmful ingredients. Studies have shown that there are problems with key chemicals that are used in the formulation of many of these products we use, and so our usage of these must stop straight away. Replace them with safer alternatives. If you would like more information on how to obtain safe products or copies of Cancer, Why We're Still Dying to Know the Truth, or even more copies of this cassette, contact the person who gave you this tape. Find out how to get involved so we can all pull together to bury the scourge of cancer finally and forever within our families and our nations. Find out how we can be wise and be well.